Okay, let's get started. So today, Melissa and I will be talking about as much as we can about regenerative agriculture within an hour. We're going to talk about how it's applied, some of the ways you can engage in it on different farming scales. But before we get started, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm John Little. I am the small farms and local foods agriculture agent in Durham County. And Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Melissa Bell. I am the field research liaison for the Center for Environmental Farming Systems.
Thank you. So before we get started, let's just kind of spend a minute talking about what exactly regenerative agriculture is, because it's a buzzword, it's a buzz phrase. There's a lot of things that may or may not be regenerative alongside sustainable production. So to kind of consider what we're talking about today, not only is regenerative ag something that pertains just to farming and food production, it's also relevant to land management, environmental stewardship, and certainly has a lot of relevance in ecology and not just producing food and resources. Um, One of the big things that we really seek to achieve when we're supporting regenerative agriculture is really kind of a harmony between production of these food products and resources and also with Mother Nature, with ecology. In the last several generations, we kind of have gotten further and further away from employing these natural principles and using some of these natural practices on the farm. But regenerative ag really seeks to kind of bring back some of that harmony. Additionally, enhancing the viability long term of the land and the farm. That's a big thing that we're trying to achieve. When one is dependent on fossil fuels and programs that may or may not be fluctuating in their availability or their accessibility. Um, when you're depending upon things that are fluctuating in their availability, um, and and their sustainability, then existing long term, with the practices that you're already employing might be hard. So we do seek to use some of these natural processes that have been here essentially forever, in keeping our farms viable and productive. Um, so preventing or reversing some of the degradation of the environment that can occur, especially alongside some more extractive agricultural processes. That is something that regenerative ag would like to do. And then additionally, when you talk about productivity and functionality of our farming systems, you can, in theory and in practice, if you execute it correctly, you can achieve more with less in sustainable and regenerative systems. Lastly, when the less that you have to rely on non-sustainable things, the more resilient your community can be, your agricultural community can be in regard to some of the problems that we experience. So some of the things that we want to focus on today, and I'll try not to spend too much time talking about theory at the beginning. We've talked a bit about soil health before, but today we're going to kind of examine soil health since it is so important to agricultural regeneration. We're going to examine how to do that. We're also going to discuss some of the ways that holistic or less intensive chemical use practices can be beneficial to regenerative ag. We're going to talk about the role of diverse ecosystems and the plants and animals that live in those ecosystems and how those plants and animals can kind of um, usher along the ability to use more of these natural processes within your farm production. Organic matter, that's a huge one. That's where a lot of these principles regarding or relating to soil really get their start. water and nutrient runoff, not to just read the slide, but to give you a little bit of explanation there, whenever we do use soil and microbial life to support some of the fertilization of the plants in the ground, then we are less inclined to use um, chemicals and other soil amendments that might ultimately run off into local water systems. Using beneficial wildlife and insects to control pest populations, also promoting pollination. And then another big thing that we really want to talk about is how these systems um, that are not monoculture, these systems that were, ideally are highly diverse polyculture systems, they have more resistance to some of the problems that we will be encountering with our climate in the future. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, in addition to some of the resources that are available to folks who do want to pursue regenerative farms. But in the name of time, let's get started and talk a little bit about one of the bigger principles regarding regenerative ag, which is promoting diverse plant production systems. So, if you're really intentional and you incorporate a variety of different crops, some annuals, some perennials, some trees, some ground cover. We many of us are aware of a lot of different things that we can plant. If not, we'll talk more shortly. But the more that you are intentional about having a variety of roots in the ground, and plants in the ground, you can really benefit the growing environment in a lot of different ways. This biodiversity, not just of plants, but also animals, can really kind of promote a food web where there's a lot of activity, a lot of things to be decomposed, a lot of natural fertilizers. Um, so, kind of the more diverse variety of microbial life that you can support by providing with different types of fuels that might be the result of different types of plants in the ground, the more diversity you can have within that soil, effectively, the better it is going to perform, and theoretically, the less you will have to use anything that didn't originate on the farm. So, we want to also be considerate that the life that can be supported underground in the soil is not the only life that's going to kind of revolve around these ecosystems that you create on the farm. The animals running, on the terrain also, can have a lot of different possible benefits to the ecosystem as well. So supporting life and a variety of it is something that, broadly speaking, we strive to do within regeneration. Um, Talking a little bit more about biodiversity, uh, that life that does exist within healthy soils can really achieve a lot of those processes naturally that many producers attempt to either supplement or to replicate through chemicals or, mechanical processes, or even, like tillage, or a number of other practices that one might take for granted as common on the farm, can be somewhat effectively managed, at least by having really healthy soils and an abundance of life in it. So finding harmony again between some of these natural processes and growing what you want to grow is achievable, but you have to be intentional. So one thing that we also want to mention that I think we've certainly at least touched on in some of our past webinars where we talk about pathogens or pests, is that in addition to crop rotation, which I'll explain shortly, in addition to crop rotation, employing a variety of different crops in the same space, intercropping, or, in some varieties, companion planting, that can offer some help in disrupting disease cycles, pest problems. So there's more benefit to it than just managing for fertile soils. But we'll certainly expand upon that shortly. Um, talk about soil a little bit because we can't miss it when we're talking about regeneration. But soil health is really one of the primary components of regenerative agriculture. Um, Many of you have probably heard some bits and pieces of soil health in previous webinars, but I'd like to be quick about it because it really is necessary to kind of understand regeneration. So if you're a farmer, if you're a gardener, if you're somebody who's trying to produce, um, it's important to take care of soil health because that really is going to be the ultimate medium that dictates the health, the nutrient availability, and many other factors relating to producing your plants. So, we'll talk more about organic matter and soil conditions shortly. But let's now talk about how specifically we can care for that soil health. Um, and we'll elaborate on a lot of these, but I want to offer a bit of context. So, here are some of the kind of primary things that we want to do. And realistically, if we're not to say that tilling is always bad, but if you are tilling frequently and tilling deeply in order to, achieve, maybe you're trying to get rid of compaction, maybe you're trying to cultivate so you can plant. But if you're disturbing those soils and you're churning up a lot of those healthy microbes, into the air and the sunshine and the elements, that is, you might get an advantage for the texture of the soil and the maneuverability and the plantability, but you're probably going to lose a lot of that life that makes those nutrient and water cycles work efficiently and well. So, as a general rule, minimize your tillage if you want to take care of the extremely beneficial life forms within the soil. Living roots, we talked about how roots going to different depths, which also not only take from the soil, but also provide resources to the soil. Having those living roots, and ideally a diverse variety of plants, um, that is a good way to offer resources to a variety of those life forms. Keeping that soil covered is, whether it be with mulch or cover crops or plastic or something, that's how you keep the wind and the sun and the rain from beating down on those life forms and also from washing away some of the resources. Adding that organic matter, whether it be compost or manure or eventually green manures, which we'll discuss at some point from cover crops, that is the fuel to the fire that we're trying to grow. Um, so you can, one general rule is don't work the soil too much when it's wet because you can really harm some of those good soil structures that are able to retain and filter water and nutrients. So you don't want to get rid of those healthy pores in the soil by compacting it when it's wet. We'll talk over and over and at length about some alternatives to heavy chemical use. But generally speaking, pretty much anything you're going to get in a bottle or a jug and put on the ground is, probably not going to be good for those life forms, although they may stimulate the plant to be productive. So it kind of depends on long-term goals, short-term goals, financial goals, environmental goals. We can talk about that certainly more. But a variety of different types of plant families is also going to be the best for offering life and home to the things that we're trying to cultivate to support our plants. We might call ourselves soil farmers and some of what we're doing here. Um, to talk about crop rotation, I want to advance forward a little bit, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know this is a concept we've discussed at least once or twice, but the benefits of having one plant family follow another plant family, following another plant family, you know, three at least, but more than that, successions. There's such a benefit to that in providing different nutrients to the soil. Again, those roots, that's a two-way street between the plant and the soil. Um, one of the primary nutrients to replenish is nitrogen, which you can Use legume cover crops. You can also employ the use of green manures, which is essentially allowing some of those cover crops to decompose into your soil, providing nutrients. Also, if you don't have the same plant family in the same place season after season, if there were any diseases or pests or illnesses that had taken hold, breaking that cycle with a new type of plant is a very effective way to prevent that problem from continuing to exist. And then also, when you're considering soil structure, the texture, the porosity, um, and also the fertility throughout the different depth of the soil. Having plants with deeper or shallower roots, and a variety of those, that's just one additional benefit you might see in your soil. Um, Considering crop rotation, a little bit more, um, you can really achieve improved soil texture and also kind of different structure. Structure is the word I'm looking for. Um, so those physical properties can be changed even if they're difficult to change. And really to also consider tillage. Conservation tillage as opposed to regular tillage is going to be something where you build up those crop residues, where you build up that, green manure on the soil surface, which can act like a mulch and can, minimize some of that erosion. So, lastly, when you are considering crop rotation, and I'll give you an example of how to do this shortly. But when you're considering crop rotation, it can really affect your nutrient management practices, which is one of the ways that we can promote regeneration by not supplementing synthetic fertilizers to achieve those nutrients. There's a study here listed that some of our friends in cooperative extension out towards, I believe, Wilkes County did this in regard to crop rotation a few years ago. But there's a lot of good information about it. And if you contact your local county office, we can probably give you some insights onto what crops might be good for different schemes in your area. Um, so let's see. Um, I kind of mostly just talked about legumes and some of the different management systems for nutrients. So let's actually advance one slide. I want to talk about some of the basics of how this works, and we'll jump off of soil and crop rotation in just a minute. But it's so important to everything that we're going to talk today. I can't talk about today that I can't miss it. Um, 3 years of rotations from plant family to plant family. If you want to include cover crops that are maybe not something that you intend on harvesting, that's certainly a good idea within a rotation plan because cover crops can replenish unique characteristics of the soil and they can also break some of those pathogen cycles. So here's an example. Some folks might go from a legume to a root to I see some nightshades and some cucurbits in the fruit family to leafy greens. Um, they're botanically different enough from one another that problems can't really sustain from season to season with different plants, and then they all offer unique benefits to the life within the soil. Um, the next thing that I quickly want to talk about, because in regenerative ag, when we're considering crop rotation, we also have to be mindful of soil pH. Let me advance one slide, please. Um, so considering soil pH, lime or sulfur, which you would use to adjust the acidity of the soil before you plant, those are soil amendments that certainly can affect the life and the health within the soil. Um, but realistically, maintaining a pH, a level of acidity that is appropriate for what you're trying to grow and the life within the soil is probably of greater consequence than the negative benefit of um, putting something on the ground and how it would interact with the microbes. Liming is a very important practice, even though you're employing an off farm input. Um, I don't want to talk too much more about this right now in the context because pH is certainly a lesson in itself. But I want to mention some of the crops that you can use in a crop rotation. Here's a number of the different plant families that are going usually to succeed pretty well around here. And here's an image of a small garden bed where you can see that folks are rotating. It looks like 6 or 7 different plant families in there, but everything from lettuces and leafy greens to, cold weather root vegetables, to, fruiting, productive summer crops that produce, juicy fruit. There's a lot of different things you can rotate in, but any of the things that you see here on this list are things that are proven to be successful food crops in North Carolina. You can benefit the soil, you can get rid of pathogens, you can do a lot with these plants other than just eating them. Um, so to talk about why some of these things work and why we want to be doing them, I want to talk a little bit about how healthy soils can lead to productive crops. And again, we're not by soil health, I don't mean the soil contains the appropriate amount of nutrients, ideally to produce tomatoes or something like that. What I mean is the soil is capable of having the microbial life within it function healthily, and thus they will be capable of transporting the nutrients within the soil to the plant, among many other processes. So the big ones that we pay attention to are N, P, and K. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We usually will either have to test the soil to determine if we do have them, or if we need to add them. And then many of the other micronutrients are also things that you may have to measure or address or add fertilizers to, depending upon what plants you're trying to grow. But a healthy soil will require less inputs, and that is the fact that we're trying to explain today. So, um, to talk about regeneration in regard to that organic matter that comprises the soil, that feeds the worms and the beetles and the decomposers, um, that really is one of the biggest, most important factors that we're trying to really foster. Um, and again, I know we're kind of rallying against tilling here right now, please consider everything that I say gray area, not in terms of factual accuracy. We're talking about research here, but gray area in terms of what is best for you. There are many, many ways to the top of the mountain, and if you're somebody who tills more than once a year, that's okay. I'm not trying to vilify you, but I do encourage you to consider that it might be more productive or sustainable, or you know, there's probably some other good adjectives there too, but don't till too much if you can help it. You might promote compaction and other physical and structural factors that prevent the soil from working as well as it can. I've talked about those microbes enough already, but they don't love tillage. Um, and there are some ways you can prevent the need for tillage. If you have, again, a number of different root types and root sizes and depths in that soil, you will probably not struggle too much to break it up to put transplants in there or do whatever else you need to do. Um, to talk about organic matter for just another second or two before we kind of bring in some of the other concepts relating to soil health and biodiversity. Um, those organic matters, that the fuels for the little animals, in and on the soil to eat, um, include essentially different stages of living not living and decomposing materials to kind of feed the functions of the soil. You can see some of those here. And then on the next slide, we want to kind of talk about how some of these living organisms can kind of tunnel and break down different types of materials. Would you mind advancing one slide for me? Um, let's see. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So considering kind of how these living organisms can break down some of the different materials, it's important to kind of recognize what properties of the soil are biological and which are not. The animals and the roots within the soil, the organic matter that we're talking about, those are biological. In regeneration, we're certainly paying attention to the natural biological processes a lot. But when you talk about the chemical processes, those are not, it's not a contradiction to holistic production to be aware of these, necessarily. So knowing what your pH looks like, knowing what your nutrient holding capacity looks like, and the nutrient availability, these are properties of soil that are important to know and understand. And then we've talked a bit about, the porosity, the compaction, some of the different elements of structure within the soil. All of these are to say that essentially the more that you pay attention to the variables of soil health, the more that you will ideally be able to achieve many of the other tangential elements with sustainable and regenerative ag. Um, so to quickly talk, and I want to be quick with this, but promoting organic matter with different crops in the soil. Maybe they're cover crops, maybe they're your cash crop. But what we're trying to do is promote that organic matter. So we can not only reduce the erosion on the area where the plants are trying to get nutrients by wind and water, but also just many of the characteristics that are going to make those resources accessible to the plant. Um, if we go one more slide, I can talk a little bit about keeping the soil covered. That's a really important thing also, because whether you do it with a cover crop, whether you have clover there, or maybe you've got, mulch there, which will control the weeds, keep the sun and the rain off the soil, you know, um, ideally will create a healthy ecosystem for some of those beneficial insects and pollinators. If we do achieve this, then we essentially do a good job of not undoing some of the hard work that we've gotten to through promoting biodiversity, through promoting polycultures and you know lack of chemical use. Keeping that soil covered is one of kind of the final steps you can use to, I guess, seal it in if you're looking for a metaphor. But that's something we certainly want to be mindful of. And I before I get on to the next concept, if you wouldn't mind, Melissa, I would love it if you, because you're my authority on cover crops here, would you give the folks a small explanation of kind of a variety of some of the things that could achieve what I was talking about, real quick?
Yes, I would love to. Thanks, John. Yeah, so I love talking about cover crops. So as John was saying, a cover crop it's something planted between periods of regular crop production for all the variety of benefits that John just outlined. I love this picture here, this diagram of just the diversity in root structures of our different cover crops. We have some, ryegrass, our daikon radish, different legumes. Every cover crop has its own advantages. But I wanted to just give you a quick overview of things that are available to us in the Southeast. Our grasses and grains, things like wheat and rye, Sudan grass, millets, they tend to have extensive root systems, and they're called scavengers because their roots are able to catch any water or nutrients that would otherwise be lost through the soil profile because you're not growing a cash crop. They produce substantial amounts of above ground biomass, which we've talked about how that can add organic matter to the soil. And they decompose slower than these more herbaceous legumes. So the legumes, they are able to fix atmospheric nitrogen. They have a symbiotic relationship with a soil bacteria, rhizobia, in their root attached to their roots that's able to take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into mineral nitrogen available for plants. They attract beneficials. They're a source of nectar. The plants themselves can be 3 to 5% nitrogen, depending on growth stage, and they tend to decompose quickly. So a lot of times you'll hear people talking about cover crop mixture, mixing a grass and a legume, because then you're getting the benefits of both and more slower, more moderated release of nutrients into the soil. Things like sunflower and buckwheat, great for pollinators. You can have a whole block planted in the sunflowers or buckwheat, or you can intercrop with both. And then brassicas and mustards, things like our forage radish, which we see up here. These have a deep taproot that can penetrate farther into the soil. It's called biodrilling. When that root is either pulled or decomposes, these channels are left in the soil, so nutrients and water can penetrate deeper into the soil.
Thank you, Melissa. If you all can't tell, Melissa is the person to get your info on cover crops from. So I didn't want to omit that chance to learn a little bit more. But Melissa, I will tag back in for a few more slides, and I'll be quick about it. So thank you. Um, Considering agroforestry, one of the ways that you can achieve a biodiverse and regenerative growing area, first consider pollution and water pollution, uh, which is going to occur from excessive ag chemicals and fertilizers. That's a pretty big problem in agriculture. Now, consider that from 2007 to 2012, pesticide use increased by 10%, while use increased by 20%. This is more than a decade ago, and I'm sure those trends have been increasing ever since then. In 2017, nutrient runoff from agricultural regions above the Mississippi River created essentially a hypoxic dead zone in the Gulf of, I guess it's the Gulf of America now, but it was the largest measured in close to 30 years. These statistics are the results of relying on extractive and non-regenerative agricultural practices. So if you have plant production systems that are uptaking water and nutrients at different times and in different places, you can offset a lot of this runoff. You can make the most of a resource that's already in the ground and put it into your plants, and you can also prevent it from going into water systems in local areas where they can be a problem. We could talk a lot more about this, but in the name of time, let me advance to talking a little bit more about some of the ways that agroforestry can be helpful. Um, Take, for example, carbon sequestration, which is the process of storing carbon kind of in a carbon pool, which will really play a big role in limiting climate change and reducing the amount of carbon dioxide. Um, Forests and food forests can play a big part in kind of the global climate or global carbon cycle. So reducing some of that carbon dioxide from the air can really allow forests, but also just large areas of agricultural production with perennial plants, excuse me, doing that can really kind of help those things to become like major mitigating forces for climate change, kind of turning them into carbon sinks, which are what we want to do. And the last couple things I want to talk about very quickly are how regenerative ag can kind of support climate change resilience. If you consider building organic matter, cover cropping, composting, rotational grazing, if you have animals, you can increase soil organic carbon, pulling it from the atmosphere. If you're not tilling, you can help retain that carbon in the ground and support that life. If you're working to develop the soil structure, you can increase water retention, water infiltration, and ultimately reduce the impacts of droughts. If you've been in North Carolina trying to grow stuff long enough, you realize that we're growing stuff here that only grew in Georgia a while ago. So, paying attention to heat and drought are very important. Deep-rooted plants are going to improve access to underground water, stabilizing crops in dry periods. Diverse crops and perennial cover can do a lot to help soil erosion. These are a big deal. And then Melissa, would you advance me one, please? But then lastly, if you are taking care of that healthy microbial ecosystem, you have organic matter, you have fungal networks in the soil that can kind of absorb excess water, make the use of that resource. A polyculture is going to reduce vulnerability to pests and pathogens that might exist in a monoculture type system. Um, Natural predators of pests are really, a good, I guess what I'm trying to say is biological pest control kind of reduces the resilience on synthetic pesticides. Rotational grazing with livestock can not only prevent overgrazing, but also enhance that grassland productivity. And then lastly, if you have, agroforestry and you're employing silvopasture, you can kind of create microclimates by incorporating those livestock with the trees to ideally reduce the heat stress in some of those areas. So I have talked far more than my allocated time, and I've put Melissa at a disadvantage. I'm sorry, Melissa. Please have at it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
I'm just going to talk a little bit about soil. When I was in Peace Corps and I got interested in agriculture because I was working with farmers there, and I came back and I wanted to figure out how I could fit in and best help farmers. And I settled on soil science because really it's at the basis of all of it, right? They say without soils, we would be naked, hungry, and homeless, and it's true. And so soil degradation is a global crisis. It's a global crisis. Soil degradation, which is this complex process, that diminishes the quality and the fertility of soil, is a global crisis. And regenerative agriculture is focused on using ecological principles, like John said. In ecological principles, they recognize that plants and animals are connected to each other and connected to the environment. And it's a comprehensive set of practices focusing on renewing our soil. So it's talking about shifting the paradigm away from industrial agriculture. I'm not talking about conventional agriculture. I'm talking about industrial agriculture, right? Large scale monocultures that are competing against nature by using herbicides and pesticides, minimizing diversity, very reductionistic, and focusing on maximizing diversity and protecting the soil, partnering with nature, right? So the focus is on renewing the soil by working within natural systems. But you don't need a label to change the paradigm. There are many folks out there that are practicing regenerative agriculture that might not even know that term or are not calling it that, but have seen a reason to change the way that they're farming or grazing. And maybe it's cost, or maybe they've seen degradation in their own soils and they're changing the way that they're farming. And they're thinking more holistically. So we've sort of beaten this to death already, but holistic is talking about looking at how everything's connected, and so that you can't explain one piece without looking at the whole. So for example, what happens when you till the soil for seedbed preparation? Something that's really common, something that we do for cover crops, right? Prepare that seedbed. But to recognize that when we're doing that tilling, we're affecting soil moisture content, the microorganisms, structure, pore space, soil carbon for sure, and the organic matter in the soil. On this, and additionally, like what happens when we incorporate organic material into the soil, then we're adding food for microbes, increasing soil organic matter, and all those benefits that come with that. We're helping aggregate the soil structure, so we're reducing erosion. So just to think about, one action and then the waterfall of effects that one action has. But just like we didn't invent organic agriculture, we did not invent regenerative agriculture. the regenerative agriculture, this Three Sisters planting is a perfect example of regenerative agriculture, and that's was practiced over 3,000 years ago in North America by the Iroquois people. Um, the practice of planting these three crops together is a win-win-win situation. The corn acts as a trellis for the beans, and the corn is a great carbohydrate source. The beans are adding nitrogen to the soil, and they're a great protein source for humans. The squash is covering the ground, it's keeping weeds down, it's mitigating the soil moisture, and it's a great source of vitamins and minerals for humans. So planting like this, each crop yield can be higher than if you were going to plant them in each in a monoculture. And topsoil loss. So many people do not know that it takes over 500 years to form 1 inch of topsoil. So topsoil is non-renewable on a human time scale. Loss of topsoil through water and wind erosion, overgrazing, overuse of pesticides, construction, farming, the new Home Depot, the houses that are going up in my neighborhood. I mean, that topsoil is just gone. And all our organic matter, our nutrients, plant roots, microorganisms are all in this topsoil layer. So people don't pay much mind, really, or think about the fact that this topsoil is non-renewable. In North Carolina, our state soil is a sea soil, and the topsoil layer can vary from 2 to 8 inches. But when we lose this topsoil, we get decreased yields, we get flooding, we get water pollution, and start down the road of like complete ecosystem degradation. So it is so important to protect our topsoil. And John talked a lot about ways to protect the topsoil, and the biggest is building biomass, right? Building that organic matter in the soil. By adding the material, cover cropping, keeping the soil covered, reducing tillage. This is an example of a summer cover crop, sorghum Sudan grass. It has all this above ground biomass, or a more perennial or semi-perennial grazing system here. All these practices will help build organic matter. So I wanted to touch briefly on the regenerative label, because I thought maybe people would have questions about the labels. There are 3 labels out there. And just like in the beginning, how organic label, it's not really regulated right now. I'll say that. But there's 3 labels and they're all different. I found this website called Foodprint that's super consumer friendly, that a lot of this information is from describing these 3 labels. And they have a great explanation of each label. And then they also have this food label guide that goes beyond our discussion here, talking about, things that consumers see, like naturally grown or pasture raised, be it for beef or chicken, for eggs. It'll explain all those labels to you. So I really, Foodprint, this food label guide, was really beneficial. So the 3 labels that are out there, one is ROC. It's the Regenerative Organic Certification. And I think it has some teeth because the standards were developed in conjunction with the Rodale Institute, which has been a nonprofit since 1947, focused on organic farming research. And they have a wonderful research farm up in Pennsylvania. This label it requires the producer to already have USDA organic certification. It prohibits synthetic fertilizers. It requires a third-party inspection. It lists things like social fairness as a requirement, fair pay, things like fair pay and safe working conditions. The Rodale site even has a little video that will explain this label to you. The second one out there is called Land to Market. And this is an outcomes-based label. And they have technicians, that I don't know what they're measuring exactly, but they say they're measuring ecological outcomes. And their goal is connecting brands like UGG with farms that have been shown to be improving their soil and pasture quality. Then the newest one is called A Greener World, has high standards for animal welfare, restricts the use of glyphosates, eliminates nitrogen fertilizer. Their website has a link, a PDF link that compares the three different labels. They're focused, I don't know how they measure this. They're focused on worker welfare, which you can measure, but environmental quality, supporting local communities. I included the chart here, which you can't really read, but this is their website, so they have everything marked in green. But then it's got the ROC here and um, the land to market and a fair trade, and they're focusing on things like animal welfare, human welfare, community, environment, transparency. So this is a PDF that's on their website. Um, and that food print website is just really helpful to see, corporations aren't necessarily transparent with how they're labeling things. So it's upon the consumer, and websites like this are really helpful to the consumer to try to figure out all the jargon that that are on some of the products. USDA organic is well regulated, has clear standards, but some of the other there are others that do have clear standards, but some of them might not have a lot of teeth behind them. So just some of the pros and cons of farming using these regenerative principles. A real pro right off the bat would be reduction in actual costs, because you're reducing your tillage, you're reducing pesticide use and fertilizer costs. Longer term, we're talking about soil health, pollinators, beneficial habitats, increased yields. Cons, when you're changing a paradigm, you're going to have, it might be more complicated planning and timing. You might need some specialized or just different machinery. Possibility of high costs when you're transitioning from conventional practices, and a steeper learning curve just for just more involved planning. Some site specific complexities. If you're going for that regenerative label, there might be limited market access right now, might be more labor intensive, and you'll have different pest and weed pressures to deal with than you're used to. So I think that's the last slide. We definitely have time for questions and answers. We have all our upcoming webinars here, but they're also on the CEF's website. John, are they on the extension website too?
I don't think we have them up yet on the extension website. That would be on me. But I certainly would love it if folks would register for any of them on the CEF website if they already are online. I do also want to point to that for those of you who have been attending these for, I guess we've been doing them for 3 years now. But those who've attended before, we try to do at least one webinar on maintenance practices for common crops. This year we're doing, I guess it'll be our next webinar. We're going to be talking about maintenance for warm season crops, ideally right around the time you'll be ramping up for that. And then also cool season crops again later in the year, just before fall. What I wanted to draw y'all's attention to is that if you have attended those before, we will be kind of doing a new variation on that where we talk about some additional crops. So it won't be redundant if you've attended before, but we certainly look forward to having folks present at any of these that you're able to join. That being said, I guess we're on question time now. I'm looking through the chat. I see a question about organic matter percentages within the soil.
Yeah.
Um, Considering decomposition and building organic matter, Melissa, do you have a good answer for that one?
I don't. I mean, I know it would be, so first of all, organic matter would be, organic material is what you're adding to the soil. And then organic matter, when it's fully decomposed, won't resemble the original material at all, just to clarify those terms. But, it's dependent on your soil type. Um, so I don't have, I'd like to know where this person is. A good organic matter. Are you looking it up, John?
Well, I'm looking into a few different resources.
Yeah.
We might have to get back to you on that one. We'll certainly be happy to do that, if we can't provide you anything today. But honestly, it's something that is in flux. I mean, if you you certainly don't want to have an overabundance of organic material to where it can't decompose into soil in a way that will help the plants to function. Um, but I know decomposition rates vary based on, carbon to nitrogen ratios, based on moisture, temperature. So, if there was an ideal amount, it would certainly fluctuate throughout the year. But I would say realistically, at the very least, you want enough to feed the microbes that are in there, which is a hard moving target to hit. But I'll have to look in and see if we have any information there.
Yeah, I see that he said he's in Charlotte.
Mhm.
And the soil test said it was a mineral soil. Almost all the soil tests will say you're a mineral soil. It's that we do have organic soils down at the coast.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Charlotte's, yeah, Piedmont soil, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, Leon,
5%.
we'll have to get back to you on that one. We'll follow up with you when we send the resources after the
Any thoughts
webinar.
on aligning cover crops with next season's vegetable crops? Absolutely. Um, Todd, if you want to email me, I can have a longer discussion with you about aligning cover crops with next season. Hold on, this is an
Um,
excellent resource for anyone. I don't know. Let me see if you can see this. Um, oh, the background makes it hard. It's managing cover crops from SARE.
Managing cover crops profitably, right?
Profitably, yes.
Yeah.
But so the answer would be that yes. So every cover crop has its benefits and matched with your goals, but it also has days to maturity that you can fit a cover crop in your complete season, right? Whether it's in the winter or the summer. So the answer is yes. And if you want to email me directly, I can have a longer conversation with you about that.
Good question. Well, we've got a few more minutes. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions in the chat. I know we covered a lot today and we talked a lot about how some of these theories and maybe recently less conventional practices kind of integrate into what we're trying to achieve as farmers. So if you have questions after the fact, we're certainly happy to answer those later too. I see Jeremy. Did I see that you were with Interfaith Food Shuttle? If so, thank you for being here. Asked the question of interplanting and multiple families combined with diverse cover crops. There are benefits of crop rotation that you cannot get with interplanting. Not to say that interplanting is a bad thing. I mean, there are many benefits that the right two or three or four plants together can achieve between, pest prevention to, increased, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a voracious growing plant, might be increased to grow or might be have its rate of growth increased by being around the correct other plant. But many of the benefits like breaking a cycle in disease presence or offering unique unique benefits to that soil, um, you might see some reduced opportunity in doing things like that if you're interplanting as opposed to rotating crops. Again, though, do what you can. I considering a limited space, if you are trying to sufficiently rotate your crops, it might not work within your gardening scheme or your farming scheme. So, Jeremy, excuse me, I'm happy to speak to you more later about your specific situations if you have any questions. Well, I think if we don't have any other questions in the chat, let's see.
I was just saying, two people have asked about the aligning your crops with next season vegetables, and we touched on that on our cover crop webinar that we had a couple of months ago. We talked a lot about that.
That's right. I don't know if those webinars are available yet on the CEF's homepage. Many of the past ones we have done, we're planning on making them available through the
Yeah.
website. Also, again, considering timing of cover crops, if you don't want to watch a whole past webinar, we could probably provide you with some direct resources. But the book that Melissa mentioned is kind of the gold standard for that.
Yeah, it's also a free PDF online.
Oh, that's right. Through SARE, right?
Yeah, through
Oh,
SARE.
yeah. Yeah, please check the CEF's website for our webinar on cover crops. And please sign up and register for our next one.
Yeah, and
Um,
if you want, everyone gets a recording, but if you want a copy of the slide deck, you need to email John or I to get that.
yep, yep. Well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you all so much for being here. I've probably said it at a recent webinar, but it's always absolutely a pleasure to work alongside the CEF's crew. So I thank you guys for that, and thank you all who are participants today for being present. You know, this program is as strong as the people who choose to attend it. So we appreciate you being here.
Indeed. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, y'all.